On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies primarily manage their complexity and gain additional clarity in their strategy, people, process, and technology. And we work all across life sciences, from pharmaceuticals all the way through to medical device companies. I also wanted to quickly mention today we have a workshop that can be located by going to the link at the very bottom at thescalingmethod.com, Thoughts at Scale. In this episode of Life Science Success, my guest is Mike Martin. He's the CEO of CAI, and they are a professional services firm focused on engineering and quality consulting. Mike Martin guides a team of 800 individuals across the U.S., Europe, and APAC. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate it as well. And so could you just tell the listeners a little bit about your history? For me, it's kind of interesting to dive into these and hear a little bit about, what brought you to CAI in the first place.
Yeah, so I'll jump into maybe way back early in this conversation, and you can accelerate me if you want to, but I think of myself at heart as an engineer. And so I realized that during my high school years, math and science were some things that I really enjoyed studying. And I thought, hey, I'd like to be an engineer and follow up that career path. So I went to Purdue University and studied mechanical engineering. All through my educational career, I was involved in leadership activities for student organizations and so on. And I thought as a career focal point that I wanted to combine both leadership and this desire to be a part of an engineering career and put those two things together. So I wanted to lead engineers or lead technical people. So it's been a long journey from those moments until being the CEO of CAI. But all the things in between were really connected to those two ideas. And so that's maybe a short version. You're welcome to ask a couple questions. I can fill in a few more details.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, a lot of people are used to me sort of asking these questions as well as we go through. And one of the things that I like to sort of, really understand as well is, when was that moment whenever you said, hey, look, I really would like to be the CEO of this company?
Yeah, so I don't know that there was a moment exactly like that. Let me tell you that I believe that careers are really a collection of opportunities that come in front of you and the choices that you make about those. And as you make a choice, you've chosen not to do something else. And the series of those choices kind of plots a course for your life, so to speak. Anyone that tells you, that they show you their resume and they say to you, hey, I meant to be the CEO and here's all the things I did to get there, they're probably not being truthful with you. I think really it is that you might need to have a couple of principles or 3 or 4 principles in your mind and then make your career decisions based on those principles. And that drives you towards, maybe where you want to be. So did I want to be a CEO of a life science professional service company? Not specifically, but I knew I wanted to lead technical people or lead engineering folks. And so the moment that it became possible for me was after I retired from Lilly, and we can talk about that in a bit, was that they asked me to be considered at CAI on the succession plan for the CEO. And it kind of caught me at a moment where I said, would I like to do that? Well, yeah, that aligns with these principles I've been chasing my life. And I thought, yes, I'll compete for that. And as it turned out, I was selected over some very talented people who are still with us, and thrilled and honored to lead this whole company.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me to hear similar sort of similar sort of things from people. So, oftentimes what's interesting to me is the people that sit in the CEO chair oftentimes are not people who plotted a direct path to get there, but collected a series of skills, to your point,
Yeah.
that enabled them at the end of the day to be considered as a very strong candidate. And then from that, then they were able to sort of turn that into, the spot that they landed in. So I think that's a pretty common sort of journey as well. So why don't we talk a little bit about you said you retired from Lilly as well. I mean, it's always an interesting retirement to wind up right back at work as well.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a story to that, and I'll share that. I would say to you, I graduated from Purdue with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I pursued an MBA from IU, Indiana University, in the night program. But I joined Lilly right out of school. Great company. I enjoyed my work there immensely. I was there for 32 years, and I got a chance in that 32 years to spend time twice living in Puerto Rico with my family, once living and working in China, and once living and working in Ireland, delivering big projects or big initiatives. I was a site head for device manufacturing, all that stuff across 32 years of experience. And while my wife and I were living in Ireland, Lilly offered an early retirement. And it became something that was important for us to accept, given some family circumstances. We just needed to move back home. And my wife did say to me, Don, she said, well, yeah, retirement sounds good, but you're going to keep working, right? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. So I actually officially retired for 30 days. And so I knew I was going to do something else. I just didn't know what it was when I signed the retirement paperwork. And one thing led to another. I knew Bob Chu, the previous CEO of the company, and I'd worked with the company before. Happened to land a role directing program and project management for the company, and that led to one step after another step, and finally to be the CEO to replace Bob.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where I don't know exactly at what point either that eventually I'll retire. But probably a similar sort of story. I could imagine. One, my wife would probably enjoy having me continue to work and stay busy. But then secondly, I also would enjoy the same thing. So I don't know what I would do without having to put in
Yeah,
extensive hours either. So yeah.
yeah, I'm with you there.
So you've been in the industry for a while now. How have you seen the need for operational readiness evolve over the years?
Yeah, so that term is something that I didn't invent. Our company didn't invent it. I've been around that idea for a long time. And I've had the chance in my career to impact some very large initiatives, some big investments, plant design, construction, and startup in Puerto Rico, the same in China, the same in Ireland, and a few times in the US. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot when I was younger about what not to do, maybe as you start up a factory. And all those things that I've learned, I've seen it done poorly, I've seen it done well. I've participated in both of those categories. And so I've got a lot of experience seeing what really is the goal. And for me, the best focus for these things that we call becoming operationally ready is to focus on the outcome at the end. What does the company want to achieve? And sometimes people look at capital investments as, ooh, it's designed, it's construction, that's all the cool stuff. But really, why they're doing that is because they want to launch a new product.
Right.
And so you really have to focus on getting that product made and making that with high quality and by a certain deadline or sooner. Because the sooner you launch that, the sooner the revenue comes. And so later in my career, we really focused on how do we determine or develop systems and people to be operationally ready so that when the plant starts up, it works. It does what it's supposed to, and the people know how to do that. And the latest efforts I made in my career, both at Lilly and here at CAI, is helping clients and helping Lilly at the time focus on that goal of it's not just about design, it's not just about construction, it's not just about equipment testing, it's getting people ready to use it effectively and really to have what we call a vertical startup. you push the go button, so to speak, and that plant then makes what it's supposed to make, and it gets up to design capacity quickly. So that idea has grown a lot over the years. The idea of helping something or a plant to be operationally ready. And that's really where the value comes. It speeds a product to the patient and
Yeah.
therefore improves the lives of people faster.
Yeah, and I just think about I mean, even I mean, in my time, right? I mean, whenever I was with GE Healthcare and we would install, brand new columns and things like that. I mean, we would have binder after binder for IQ, OQ, PQ to
Hmm.
get operationally ready. And then as I started to transition away, we had created some digital tools to do that same exact thing, so that we weren't
Yeah,
sending binders now around the world. We were sending
right.
validated documents electronically. We were signing electronically. I mean, those things were evolving. Like as I was getting ready to
Yeah.
leave, finally, we could do something that was much more modern for the industry. And I just think about what you just said about, this vertical integration and being ready on day one is not an easy task to do. I mean, you're pulling together a lot of pieces at the end, to make that effective as well.
Yeah, and I think documentation and technology are woven together nowadays, and we can talk about that a bit if you want. But one story I'd share with you, Don, if I could, one of the learning points, we were starting up what's called a reversed phase chromatography column, a larger diameter column than our process had ever used. And we did a lot of testing with engineers. They were testing the automation, they were testing the equipment, and it came time to train operators. And we said, hey, this thing is ready for operators to be trained. Well, it wasn't. Operators are very good at, figuring things out and acting in a system, and they found screens that we didn't know you could get to as an operator, right? They weren't making mistakes. They were just that's the way the thing allowed them to do it. And one of the engineers said, "How'd you get here?" And so we had to go back and adjust and change some things. But that was a key learning point for me of wow, if you want to be operationally ready, get your operations team engaged in the testing because they're going to help you discover what works and what doesn't so much faster, and you'll have a much better product. And most importantly, they're going to understand how to use it when it's time to run it. And that was a key moment for me. It might sound a little silly, but
No.
that's one of these. I'm like, wow, that's super important.
No, it goes back to in memory for me. It goes back to one of the Japanese philosophies in terms of like, preparing something and doing sort of a test run through it. That it needs to be as close to real life as possible. And one of the things that I remember was we were testing at GE the implementation of some of the equipment that we had, and I remember we had taped on the floor, just regular adhesive tape where the
Yeah,
walls were. And one of the Japanese senseis that we had for lean came by and said, "What is that?" And we said, "Well, it's the wall." And he said, "No, no, no. A wall has three dimensions. It's in front of
uh,
you and everything else.
yeah,
You have to go back and reconstruct this in a way that actually will simulate real life. Come on now, you know better." And
yeah,
and so we had to go back. I mean, it was a similar sort of thing, right? I mean, it's the
yeah,
only way it seems like that we learn is to get as close to real life as possible.
yeah. Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the life sciences industry, what are some of the most challenging aspects of providing consulting services that you see in the life sciences industry?
Yeah, so I'll mention a couple or three or so, but Lilly is a great company. It has a lot of plant sites around the world, and even in those plant sites, I found varying degrees of technical excellence and experience and skill. All of them at a high level, but some even higher than others. And as a consultant, I found that to be even more the case when I'm out helping clients besides Lilly, a wide range of clients who have a wide range of skill. Some of them have been very focused on the front end of product development, but they don't know about manufacturing. And some of them are really good at manufacturing and maybe they don't know some of the how do I get the concept set up, and a variety of other things or zones of skill that clients have. And finding as a service company, finding the out what the need is of the client. What do they
Mm,
actually need? Because just because I offer 6 or 7 types of services doesn't mean every client needs those, and I'll be wasting their time with some of them. But maybe they ask for service A, but they also need service B. And so if I can help them discover, yeah, service A we can help you with, but this one over here also is something that, as I've examined and helped you study what you're doing, you could probably use that support. Whether you hire me to do it or hire somebody else to do it probably doesn't matter, but that's an area where I think you could achieve some value. So that's, for me, one of the challenges of consulting is not trying to sell something that isn't needed, but really focus on, let me help you get to the end, and here's what you're good at, and here's what you might have gaps in, and how do you want to fill those gaps. So that's one that I'd mention to you. Um, the, another that I'd mention to you is probably competition and this idea of price sensitivity, which is even more active in the world in the last year or so because of the economy. But not all outcomes are just based on price. You just pick the lowest price, you should get a great result, right? Well, you might if that company also has a good product and good talent. And I think part of the trick of being a good consultant is to offer a reasonable price, but also describe why your service is very strong.
yep.
That's a tough thing to do, especially if the economy is struggling and people are ultra sensitive to price. And so those are two of the things I would mention to you. And I think the third one, I just would say, you got to think like a client.
Mm,
Um, so if you're serving a client and you're only thinking like a provider of services, well, you're probably going to say and do things that the client like, oh, I don't think that's what I want. But from long experience being a client, I understand what they're looking for.
right.
And does not, maybe not in every single case, but trust me, 32 years of living inside of that, you get a sense for what's needed. And I knew what I was looking for in service providers. And I think the challenge is to think like the client thinks and then provide a service that matches that. Those are the things I'd share with you.
Yeah, it's interesting to me the I guess two things. One is on the price sensitivity, area. I certainly have conversations like that myself. Um, and what's always interesting to me as well is that, you know, there's so many consultants inside of the space that will drop off a concept or drop off a plan to go do something, but not help you execute it. And what I'm hearing that
Yeah.
CAI really digs in and helps the client do is kind of think through that forward piece of how do we really deliver this thing, right? And not
Yeah.
necessarily just, what's inside the frame of, whatever you're contracted to do, but also like what at the end of the day are they really looking
Yeah.
for? And I mean, to me, that was one of the things that, whenever I started my own consulting firm, that was one of the things that I had said is, look, I've worked with plenty of consulting firms, a lot of the big names, and they show
Mhm.
up with a high dollar amount cost, and then
Yeah.
they deliver a plan that nobody knows whether or not it can be executed or not. And then at the end of the day, the folks that are integrators like me, we're oftentimes, faced with, okay, so how do you go do this thing? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and I've seen both things done.
Yeah.
I would say that we CAI, we're a problem solving company. So if my team walks in, does an assessment, and says, "Here's your problem. Here's what you should do about it. Send me my check, and we'll be down the street." That's not the way to
Right.
approach this. I think, yeah, you have to analyze what's going on. You have to propose ideas to solve it. But if you're not going to get your hands dirty and go help them solve it, then I don't think that's the right kind of value. And
Right.
so, problem solving mentality is something that I think professional service providers really need to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I really, I want to come back to kind of the points in terms of, where CAI really focuses as well. So my understanding is that you focus from concept all the way through to integration, which is a long time period for most
Yeah.
organizations, right? Um, so how does a normal engagement work with you? You know, where do clients kind of come in and how do they engage CAI?
Yeah, so let me start off, Don, maybe by saying what we don't focus on,
Okay.
because there's a couple things strategically we've chosen to not be in our box of tools. We have partners that we can connect with to provide these things. So design, facility design, system design, process design in its basic and detailed forms. That's not something that we do. We don't have a skill set in our company to do that. We can do small things, but we've chosen as a company to engage with partners, and there's any number of them out there that our clients have heard of. And so if a design is needed, it, it would be something we're supplementing the edges of things that are connected to operational readiness, but not the design itself. But there are lots of things that touch that if you're trying to be operationally ready. And if you don't start those things soon enough, then you
Yeah.
don't end up where you want to be. And the second thing is construction. So we're not a construction management company. So those are two things that I would say we're not that. So what are we? So I think a lot of times clients are focused on design and they're focused on construction, but perhaps they haven't thought about how do you make sure that all of your assets, once they are designed and built, can be maintained. And so what's your asset maintenance and reliability plan? And have you implemented that into a computer system? And do you have the right resources trained to execute those maintenance plans? Things like human performance. How do you qualify your operators? How do you set up job descriptions? How do you pick the right people for roles? Those are things design companies, construction companies don't do for you. Things like regulatory plans. How are you going to submit this and get it approved? How do you build a quality management system? What are your procedures? What are your policies? How are you going to execute the production of this material and get it approved batch by batch? All those things, and you can pick program or project management. Sometimes what you need is a person that can oversee, as acting as the owner from the concept to the manufacturing of the first batch, that guides the design company, that guides the construction management company, and helps orchestrate all these other things that we connect to and say these are operational readiness activities. And so you talk about that's a wide spectrum. It is, but we're not trying to do everything in that space. We're trying to do what we believe we're specialists at. So I've said this statement to a few people, and this comes from long history. The people at the end of a process know so much more about the things that worked and didn't work getting to that stage. And so if you start, we're a testing company. We started off as a testing company, but we're a lot more than that now. But the testing company knows what a bad design is
Mm.
because they've had to start one up. The testing company knows what an inadequate construction outcome is because they've had to work around that. The testing company can help you describe your systems during design, help you avoid things that can't be operated, and get your construction information set up such that when you're going to do testing, all that stuff's ready. And there's great value in using a downstream expert to guide the upstream, not to do it, but to guide it and to influence it such that it works. Design companies, and I mean, no disrespect, they're there for design, and usually they leave. And so
Yeah.
they don't get to see all of the construction and they don't get to see all the testing. And so their expertise is limited because they haven't had, in general, to start those things up. That's what we do. And we're trying to focus on the outcome for clients in that regard.
Very good. And then in terms of, really focusing in on managing risk as well and helping clients accelerate speed, it sounds to me like a lot of these pieces would come together to help that as well as an end result for the client.
Yes, and so there's a lot of things that if you're focused on the outcome of you want to start up vertically, you want to get to your production rate and make good product every time. The things that you want to do early are as important or maybe even more important than the things you do late. You can't you cannot test in quality, so to
Mm,
speak. The quality has to be built in or designed in the beginning. And I think helping clients focus on that principle is a really important outcome.
yeah. And then now, in my intro, I talked a little bit about all the countries that you are involved in. So you have a global presence in Australia, Canada, China, and more. How does
And
having a
more.
global reach impact the services that you offer as well?
Yeah, so a couple of ways I would share with you. So if you are a client that's a multinational client, you've got plants across the world, you could say to us, hey, you're going to help us with a project in the US on the East Coast, and we want that same team or the same ideas to be applied to a project in the UK. Why? Because you learned the process. It's the same plant. You learned the process in the East Coast of the US, and it's going to be the same plant, the same process, different people in the UK. And so that's a lot of value to say, hey, I helped you do it here, and I'm just going to move that knowledge over there. And in the same regard, if you're going to Asia and you're going to build a factory, and even if it's not the same one that was built in the East Coast or UK, but the process is the same. And so the multinational clients are like, I just want you to apply your expertise over there. And so we got a set of tools and expertise. I think that's one of the things I would offer to you. The second thing is that if you're not a multinational and you are a smaller company or you're just getting started somewhere, connecting with a company that has a global presence, you can contact experts we can contact experts inside our company from all over the place. And there's some problem that's happening in Singapore that we have somebody in the US that knows how to solve that. We can help apply that knowledge to your solution and vice versa. And so that I think is what's important about having a global reach. It's not easy as you as you try to explore how do you make sure your systems and your people are developed and qualified and understand your process the right way. That takes a lot of work, but that's I think one of the values of being a global service provider. Those two things are what I point out to you.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, also I kind of think of the fact that, you're crossing boundaries and then oftentimes you're crossing regulators as well. And I mean,
Mhm.
that just adds additional complexity, to each one of these steps, something else that you have to focus in on as you're helping these companies. And it is
Yeah,
important, I think, as well, for smaller companies, like you said, to consider, manufacturers that do have a global reach for a variety of reasons. One of which that comes to mind to me is just, you may have supply chain challenges in one region or the other. And you could, as most companies have kind of demonstrated over many, many years, that you can kind of overcome some of these things by having, a little bit more global exposure, because it kind of shows you the ugly side, if
yeah,
you will, in different regions.
it does, or even just a different side. Like it, not to say whether it's ugly or beautiful, but sometimes it's just different, and knowing the difference is important.
Right. So your website says that that CAI is 100% employee owned. How does this ownership model influence the company's culture and performance?
Yeah, so to explain that a little bit, we're an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership program in the US. Now, an ESOP is a US construct, and so it doesn't really exist outside the US, but we simulate that for our employees as much as we can. But the idea of ownership, I would boil it down to this. Think about, I think ownership causes like a behavior change. And I'd ask the listeners to think about things that you own and how you treat them, and think about things that you borrow and how you treat them. Pick a rental car, for example. Do you drive a rental car in the same way you drive your own car? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but generally, because you own something, you care for it even more. And is that important? Maybe not necessarily specifically in itself, but when it demonstrates that kind of care for the company, it will demonstrate the kind of value that a client wants. Because how does a how does an owner's value grow? It grows because you've grown the client's value.
Mm.
It doesn't grow any other way. And I think that's the idea of ownership that we're trying to portray. amongst ourselves. And I think that's an important aspect of who we are as a company and our culture.
Very good. I do like to take a little bit of time as well with all of the individuals that I interview, just to take a little bit of time focused in on you and some aspects of you as well. What's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received?
So I've received lots of leadership advice, right? You don't live a long time without having people give you some leadership advice. I would say that one of the biggest pieces of advice or input that I've had, leadership is not about me. Leadership is about the people that I serve. As soon as it becomes about me, it's not leadership anymore. And so I look at leadership as an opportunity to help other people, and that's how I go about it. I would tell you, Don, there's nothing special about me as a person. My mom might disagree, but maybe she wouldn't. But the best outcome, the greatest accomplishments in my experience come from helping other people achieve greatness.
Mm.
Help them produce their best result. And I think that's really what leadership is meant to be.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Oftentimes I use this analogy of, it's the leader's job to help construct the asphalt on the runway. It's the person's then job to make it fly, right? So as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
So I'm inspired by people. I'm not inspired by projects. I think they're fun, but people inspire me. And I like helping people achieve great things. And so I got examples of that. I helped build and then begin to start up a plant in China, a plant that was the population of the resources there. They didn't know about cartridge filling as a process. They knew about packaging. And so helping that group of people come to understand through the process of design and construction and startup of a cartridge filling factory, watching them and helping them develop the ability to run that factory was really fulfilling, very hard, but very fulfilling. And I was there recently and visited with them, and the way that site runs, I'm just so proud of it. It's got a great reputation for being an excellent manufacturing site. I'm very proud of what they've accomplished there. That kind of thing inspires me. It makes me excited.
Very good. What concerns you?
So I think sometimes we, as a population, we don't necessarily allow people to stretch or to grow or develop. And I think if we're trying to do too much for somebody else, I think we're threatening our future. I think the future is going to be determined, and the success of it is going to be driven by the younger generation. I'm an older guy now. It's the younger people that have come into the workforce. It's their future, right? My future is kind of now, and so I think what we need to try to do is to make sure we're not stifling them. We're not hindering them. I think we need to let them explore like we did when we were, at least when I was younger, and let them drive a future. And we just need to inspire them and help them, coach them, develop them. And I think the concern I would have is if we're not believing in them enough. And I think I see that sometimes in the world where people say, well, when we did this, it was always better, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not really true. But the younger generation is going to be the future.
Yeah, I just think about some of the older curmudgeons whenever I was, coming up as well.
Yeah.
They used to say the same thing about my generation.
Yeah.
So similar sort of thing. And
That's true.
And we all sort of find our way. I do think the younger generation has some interesting things that they're going to have to deal with that maybe we didn't have to deal with. And one of which is, and we talked about this on several episodes as well, is just, global warming and, kind of the impact of, what's going to happen in the environment, going forward, that we can't necessarily plan or see yet today. I think that generation, is left with a set of results and circumstances that they're going to have to find their way, right, and figure it out as well.
But the cool thing about that is that every generation has had its central challenge or near,
Sure.
set of central, and every generation has found some way to overcome that. And so while I agree with you that things like the environment are a concern and need to be taken care of, I also believe that people are going to find a way to resolve problems and move society forward.
I agree. Last question. What excites you?
I'm excited about the future of healthcare. So as I went back to the beginning of the story, and I was a mechanical engineer, graduated from Purdue, joined Lilly, and began my career. One of the reasons I chose Lilly over other options that I had was the idea of making the lives of people better, improving the quality of human life. And that's what Lilly was all about. That's what CAI is connected to. My whole career has been about this idea of the future of healthcare. And if you, Don, if you start to look at some of the things that are being developed these days that won't just treat a disease but cure it. Now, it's really expensive, but it won't always be that way. And what if you could cure blindness? What if you could cure diabetes? What if you could cure, you name it, some kind of cancer? It goes away and you're done with it as a person. That's an exciting future. And that's closer. It's not right today, but it's closer than it's ever been. And those ideas are going to accelerate. And I think that is a pretty exciting outcome and prospect. Now, given where I am in my life, I'll enjoy some of those benefits, but the next generation and the one after that, that's going to be world-changing stuff. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Mike Martin, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for telling me about CAI and all the great work that you guys are doing. I wish you all the best in the future, and thanks a lot for being on.
Thank you very much, Don. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.